Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and on today's video I'll be talking about my trip this year to Alliance for Passover. Alliance, or what's also known as the Alliance Colony, is the first successful Jewish agricultural community in the US, founded in southern New Jersey in 1882. I descend from one of the founding families of the community, and it has been one of the biggest focuses in my research. I've visited Alliance about a half dozen times, the first time being back in 2016. But this trip was going to be unique for three main reasons. The first reason, I was going to go metal detecting on my ancestors' land in Alliance. The second reason, I was giving a talk at my ancestral synagogue in Alliance, Tifereth Israel, which was built in the 1880s. And the last reason, I was going to be celebrating 2 Seders while in Alliance. I was also planning to go around to different cemeteries in the area, but I do that almost every single time I go up there, so it wasn't going to make it unique. I drove up Saturday, getting in somewhat later than I was really wanting to.
Curse you, Metro DC area traffic.
But it wasn't a big deal since I didn't really have anything to do until the next day. My first plans were for the next morning at 10 a.m. where I was going to go metal detecting on my ancestors' land. The land is currently owned by Will Levin, a descendant of my ancestors' neighbors, and he'd given me the approval to go metal detecting there. Will also got me in touch with Amir Myrovich, a metal detecting enthusiast who'd actually done metal detecting around the area previously. And it's a good thing he was there too, because I would have ended up wasting a ton of time and energy. Amir had actually started metal detecting earlier that morning, so once I arrived, I gave him a call, we met up, and then headed over to the land that was once my ancestors. Alright, I am here with Amir. I have my metal detector, and I'm about to go do metal detecting on the land way back there. It used to be owned by my family, so here we go. Now, I'm only 90% sure this was the correct land because I still have to locate more deeds from the Salem County Courthouse to better confirm, but based on the many deeds we already have, along with a general map of the area, it seems to be correct. My family sold the land sometime in the 1920s or 1930s, and then it changed hands a few times, with the original house being torn down and a new house being built sometime in the 1950s and 60s, but that house ended up being torn down as well. The first area we started metal detecting was the location of the house foundations. There seemed to be multiple foundations, one for the older original house, another for what I assume is the newer house, and then a foundation for what might have been chicken coops or maybe something else. My aim was to try to find anything that would date back to the 1920s or earlier. Basically, anything we find like that, I would presumably be able to link to my family. I had a lot to learn about metal detecting, and Amir was extremely helpful, explaining the different metals and the nuances of the beeps of the metal detector. Amir also had some equipment that I didn't have, which was quite vital. We didn't find much around the house area, although Amir explained to me that most metal detector enthusiasts avoid the iron readings because it's usually trash, but since my goals are a bit more archaeological, I may not want to ignore those readings. So I dug up a few iron readings, but they really were mostly nails and trash, so I just started to ignore those. After a little time around the house area, we then moved over to the field for this land. This was quite intriguing because Alliance is known for having sandy, loamy soil, but this was my first time really experiencing it firsthand by walking through freshly tilled soil. It reminded me of when I was a kid growing up in the Chicago suburbs and we'd have to walk through multiple feet of snow to get to the bus stop. Amir and I walked up and down the field for hours, digging up something every few minutes or so, but we really didn't find a whole lot. Finally, around 2:30, we decided to call it a day, and Amir was extremely generous in giving me all the items we had found that day, along with some of the tools I needed to help with future metal detecting. So I have the items here in this bag, and really didn't get a whole lot. The coolest looking thing was this handle from a knife, I guess it seems to be, but based on what it looks like it's much more modern than 1920s, so doubtful that it's from my family. There was the closest thing that we could tie possibly to the 1920s was this piece of glass, which based on the glass, the thickness and the kind of coloring of it, we were thinking maybe it was like 1920s or something. There was some other glass we found as well, although this was thinner and the way it's curved maybe a bit more recent. And of course there's a lot of other stuff. I'm not going to show everything, but I think the thing that stood out the most was this piece, which I doubt that you'll be able to read, but basically it says something manufacturing company, Vineland, New Jersey. And based on the way that it looks, it very well could be early 1900s, possibly around the time of my family. Unfortunately, just not enough to know for sure. So I just finished up doing metal detecting. Didn't find a whole ton of stuff. Found some interesting stuff. Maybe it's linked to my family. Hard to tell if it's from when they were here. Basically, my family left around the 1920s, 1930s. So anything we can date pre that time, obviously, we could probably put to my family, but most of it was kind of after that or possibly around that time and after that. So I don't know, but Amir just headed out. I'm heading back to the hotel to get cleaned up, doing a talk tonight at Alliance. I definitely hope to get out there to metal detect again soon, although part of me wishes I could just do a full-on archaeological dig of the entire piece of land. But once we were done, I headed out to my hotel to get cleaned up because I was going to head back so that I could meet up with Will to get ready for my talk that night. Once I met up with Will, we headed out to the garage to get everything we needed to set up for the talk. And while we were there, Will was telling me a little bit about their plans for this garage. All right, we are here at a garage next to Will's house. I'm with Will Levin.
This is not just any garage, Jarrett. This is what we call the Bayek garage, even though it was built probably 8 years after Moses Bayek died. But it was owned by the Bayek Levin family. Garage attic used for storing like a little tractor for mowing lawns and other curios that my grandfather, Judge I. Harry Levin, collected over his lifetime. But the exciting thing is this was just power washed. You can see it looks like it, it's stripped of old paint and dirt. And this is going to be the site, these exterior 3 walls, not the front, but the exterior facing the cemetery, facing the street, and facing our house, Alliance mural, which will depict historic scenes of our ancestors emigrating from Russia to escape persecution and to settle the first Alliance agricultural community, the Alliance colony here in America. And it will also have the second, my wife and I call the second wave of Jewish immigration in 1951 Holocaust survivors, who are the other half of my family. So we'll have depiction of all of that and the merging of those two communities. Cut. There you go. So we're getting a TV for Jarrett's presentation.
Yep, I'll be doing a presentation tonight at the Alliance Synagogue, Tifereth Israel.
It's dark in here.
Yeah.
Not much exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely a garage. The talk was being held at Tifereth Israel, the shul which my ancestors attended in Alliance, and their names are even on some of the items in the shul. Felt very surreal as well because my talk was about Alliance, and here I was giving it in the Alliance synagogue, the shul of my ancestors. It was about a small group of maybe 10 or 12 people. A good majority of the people in attendance already knew a lot about the history of Alliance, but everyone seemed to say that they had learned a lot from my presentation as well, which was awesome. But because of the intimate atmosphere during the presentation, there was somewhat of a more conversational aspect to the talk that you usually can't get with a big room because then it just turns into chaos. But with this small group of us, especially a lot of very knowledgeable people on the subject, it was really, really cool to have that as part of the talk. I didn't get any footage of the talk or really setting up. I always am a little flustered with trying to do a whole bunch of stuff at once sometimes, so I don't always videotape it. But I did do a little bit of a live stream beforehand, so I got some footage right beforehand while everyone was pulling up, so you can kind of get an idea of what it looked like. This is Alliance Synagogue. I'm walking around over here. You can see way back over my shoulder that framed canvas, I guess you could say, has my ancestors on it. Now, unfortunately, during this trip, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't get on camera, But a big part of that had to do with the fact that we were adhering to a lot of the religious customs with Passover, and especially adhering to that the first 2 days of Passover were going to be considered holy days. So no electronics were allowed, and that's why there's no recording. But I was quite excited for the Seders, and for good reason. For one, I was really excited because it was the first time I was going to be attending a Passover Seder as a guest in many, many years. My family's not very religious, so we never really hold Passover Seders. The last Seder I had attended was in 2015, but I didn't attend as a guest. I actually attended as a cook because I worked for the company which was catering the event, because it was a very large Passover Seder with like 100 some odd people. And of course, me being the Jewish guy that worked at the restaurant, they had me lead the cater out for this, which I ended up doing like 3 or 4 years in a row. So I guess it was from about 2011 to 2015 that I was doing that. But before that, the last proper Seder I could even think of was when I was in high school and I attended one of my friend's family's Passover Seders. Although I don't know how strict they were with everything, and it was kind of a big party of like 30 people or so. But that would have been about 2005, 2006. So in all honesty, I've only experienced a few traditional Seders in my entire life. So just being able to attend some actual traditional Passover Seders was really exciting, because I've been wanting to reconnect with my Jewish heritage a lot more than just kind of looking into my ancestry. But I was also very excited because I was actually getting to experience these Seders in Alliance, a very important area in my family history and the place where my great-grandfather Jack Ekoff, who I was named after, was born. Even more, being able to experience this with Will and his family, descendants of my ancestors' neighbors from the area, it just added so much to it. But a big part of this also had to do with a letter that Will had sent me years ago when we first got in touch. But it wasn't a letter that Will had actually written, it was a letter that my great-grandmother Mary had written in 1964 to Will's grandfather, Judge Harry Levin, which said the following: "I'm enclosing a check for the amount of $75 for services rendered. Give my kindest regards to your mother and dad, Lena and Bill. I sincerely hope they are well. I remember you as a young man, and to think you have a son in the realty business. Time marches on. Thank you for rush services. Respectfully, Jack, Mrs. Mary Ekoff." Time surely does march on, because here I was, 60 years later after my great-grandmother had written this letter, attending Passover Seders with Will and his children. And that gets me wondering what things will be 60 years from now. Will my descendants and Will descendants still be in touch, and our families continuing this tradition? The part about my great-grandmother remembering Will's father as a young man really got me. And that's because Will's grandfather, Judge I. Harry Levin, was born about 1905, so he would have been a young man in the 1920s, literally 100 years ago. And then here I was seeing how much Will's children, and especially his oldest son, had grown since the last time I'd seen him almost 4 years prior. Then lastly, the son my great-grandmother references in the letter, who is in the realty business, is actually Will's dad. I don't know if this all sounds like just a bunch of rambling nonsense, and maybe only a few people really connect with what I'm actually saying here, but to me as a genealogist, I thought it just added such a beautiful twist to this entire trip. Both Seders were led by Aaron Moeller, who had actually come from Hamburg, Germany. I met Aaron years ago when I first stayed at Will's house in Alliance, and he took us on a mushroom foraging tour throughout the Alliance Forest. I actually have a video from that trip as well, so you can go and check out those videos and see what that trip was like, including the mushroom foraging. Each Seder had a pretty sizable group of about maybe 12, 15 people, including the children. Many of us attended both Seders both nights, and a lot of people were actually staying at the house with Will. And then a few people only came for one of the nights. The Seders were absolutely beautiful, and I felt so connected in so many ways, and it also reminded me a lot of the experiences I'd had, as few and far between as they were, with Seders throughout my life, because I have attended a bunch throughout my life, just, I guess, not as many as most. So I'll definitely have to attend some more next year. I also spent some time on the second day of Passover walking around the Alliance Cemetery, which is right next to where Will's house is. And my main goal was to try and find my second great-grandmother's sister, Rose Dudas, who we knew lived in the area, but we weren't sure exactly when she'd passed away. and I was hoping that she'd be buried there. I was actually kind of surprised how quickly I was able to find her stone, but I also spent time walking around the entire cemetery, which I'd never really done in a single go. I'd visited all of the cemetery throughout the years, but this was my first time doing the entire thing at once. I also visited another cemetery in a community called Carmel, which is located in Deerfield, New Jersey. This was another Jewish agricultural community which had been founded in the 1880s and was only 6 miles away from where Alliance was located. My mother's side is the connection to Alliance, but on my father's side, my great-grandfather Harry's sister, Minnie, married a man named Harry Kotler, and they lived in Carmel. I knew that my great-great-aunt Minnie was buried in the Carmel cemetery known as Chesed Shel Emeth, and I knew many of Minnie's children and other family members of the Kotler side were buried there, but I was hoping that I might be able to find my great-grandfather's parents, Benjamin Rosenberg and Beatrice Rosenberg. I knew from records that they had spent their final years in New Jersey living with Minnie and her family, so my assumption was that they may be buried there as well. Hey everyone, I am here at Chesed Shel Emeth. It's a cemetery in southern New Jersey, and I had been looking for where some of my father's family had been buried for a long time because I knew they came down to southern New Jersey, including my great-grandfather Harry Ross's mother. And I'm hoping today to be able to find their graves and hopefully take some photos. And if I do find my great-great-grandmother's grave, that should finally tell me the name of her father, and maybe we'll finally be able to make a big breakthrough in all of this research. I walked the entire cemetery, but I was unable to find any graves for my second great-grandparents, although there were a few that seemed illegible enough that maybe it was them, but it was still somewhat doubtful. But while I was walking up and down the rows, there was an old man and a young man that came in a truck with a bunch of yard maintenance equipment, and they started to get ready to start cleaning up the cemetery. So I figured I'd go over and ask them if they might know who I could get in touch with to possibly pull some records for this cemetery to see if my second great-grandparents were buried there, and maybe even get a bit more info on the family members that I already saw and found in the cemetery. The older man seemed to be really knowledgeable and ended up calling up his wife, who then came over with a big binder with multiple different indexes of who was buried in the cemetery. When we went through the book, there wasn't anything to indicate that my second great-grandparents were buried there. In talking to them, I found out that they knew the Kotler family quite well, and the older man that was there had grown up in the area, knowing a lot of them. Eventually, the older man's wife invited me to follow her around the area so that she could show me the old synagogue and some of the older buildings, and I gladly accepted. But since I was just so enamored with being offered this and just so excited to be like, I get to dive deep into the Carmel history, that I completely forgot to record. But after about a half hour of touring around the area, then I headed back to Will's to enjoy one last night with everybody before I had to leave the next day. I ended up telling everybody about what I had done in the day in terms of going through the cemetery in Carmel and going around to the different historic buildings in Carmel and talking with this couple. And while we were all hanging out, one of the guests there, Rabbi Lazer Mishalovin, asked me if I would be willing to go with him through the Alliance Cemetery to talk a bit more about the history. He had actually asked me about this previously, so I was like, yeah, let's definitely do it. This is the last chance before I go home. Will and his oldest son wanted to join us as well, so we headed out, but it was dark at this point, so we had to bring some flashlights with us. After walking around and talking about some of the history with Alliance and the different things related to that, we ended up going over to a few of my family gravestones to have Rabbi Lazer go over them and see if he could kind of figure out a bit more about what was going on. This actually started because I had told him about how some of the engravings in some of the Hebrew stones had actually been done incorrectly, and so there were some that had to be slightly deciphered because either wrong letters were being done or it was just done in an incorrect way.
This is Pei, Nun, is Ponitman. That's an acronym for Ponitman, right? Mm-hmm. Here lies. Isha, and then Bessie or Bassi, Bet Aleph Samach Yud, Bat, and it's Hey Reish, which acronym, Harav Reb, Yosef, this is a little chipped here, Yosef, Niftara, passed away, it's missing, oh no, Niftara, this is the Hey, it's supposed to be the Hey of Niftara, passed away on Zion ER Tuf Reish Ayin 5,670 Tintzeva. This is also supposed to be a bet. See, here's another mistake. This is two hays, it's supposed to be a bet. And in every word is a like an acronym sign, which is Tehei Nishmata Tzrura B'Tzrur HaChaim. May your soul be bound to the bound of life. And that's it. You might be right about someone that doesn't know Hebrew, because there's a few mistakes here. It seems like this one is supposed to be a hey, this one's supposed to be a bet.
Yeah.
The most significant grave we focused on, though, was my third great-grandmother, Rebecca Ekoff, who had lived to be 102 years old, dying in the 1920s. By manipulating the light from the flashlights to create shadows, as well as feeling through the letters, we were able to finally figure out and decipher what this stone said. And while I do have video of us figuring this out, I was using the light from my camera to get the shadows. So a lot of the imagery is just really weird looking. It's just basically close-ups of my third great-grandmother's gravestone. We ended up being outside for over an hour, and by the time we got back, everyone was laughing because they were like, "What happened to you?" Especially since I don't think they expected us to take that long for a cemetery tour at night. But after hanging out and chatting a bit more, everyone finally decided it was time to get to bed, so I headed back to my hotel to get some much needed rest for my long drive home the next day. If you enjoyed this vlog and you'd like to see more vlogs just like this, be sure to check out this video of mine right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.